Hello, everyone, and welcome back. This is the usual writing and programming language in Rust stream, where at the moment I'm working on a research-based language called Seed, which aims to provide a kind of a test bed that I'll be using for different programming language ideas. Another one that I've been thinking about even earlier today, I've been kind of updating myself on some recent developments in the programming space. But as for the main project that I'm working on here, the next phase of it that I'm hoping to implement is called Ash, which is intended to be an alternative to Bash scripting, but keeping a lot of the, I would say, ergonomics of Bash. It was funny, I was actually on a Slack forum the other day, and people were kind of reiterating their grievances with Bash. And sometimes, because I do a good bit of programming in Bash itself, I've gotten quite used to a number of the quirks, even though I even got stung by one of them during the week where I had left out a directive for set pipe fail, which makes things a bit more painful because by default when you pipe things in Bash, as far as I'm aware, it's only the exit code of the final item that determines whether the pipeline as a whole was successful or not, which can be problematic because usually the links and the processes, basically most of the processes kind of after the first one, are more or less processing the output from the original program in the pipeline, and so quite often you are interested in the outcome of that. But at least pipe fail means that the exit code of the pipeline as a whole will be non-zero if any of the elements fail, and then you pair that with error exit, and then you have a more, I guess, ergonomic and possibly more intuitive short-circuiting functionality that I think can be quite useful for scripting languages, because the default in the past, like with the likes of JavaScript in the browser and certainly with shell scripts, there seemed to be an attempt to keep going even if errors were occurring. And I think these days people recognize that maybe there's a bit more value in terminating early when an error occurs. And so those are the kind of improvements that I want to set as defaults in Ash. And yeah, that's where the direction that this whole endeavor is heading in. And so for the development environment that I'm working in, I run all of this in a remote environment that I connect to using Mosh for a stable connection. I run just plain Vim with NerdTree here in the top left. I use tmux to split out my session into different sessions and panes, and so I have Vim here on the left. I've got an ENTR script running on the right, which will rebuild the project and rerun tests whenever a test or the project itself gets updated. And then I just have I just have a regular bash session down in the bottom left, which will be used for just running Git and things like that. And I opened another session down here on the right that I'm actually going to close now. So where I left it last day, and I've been fairly eager to follow up with it because I've been thinking about it was a fairly productive session. It had been updating the functionality, or rather the implementation of assignment and binding, so that when an item gets updated, or a variable gets updated rather, what I had been doing is essentially modeling the context and environments as a mapping of names to essentially boxes. I called them value references, which are implemented using arcmutexes in Rust, but conceptually can just think of it as a box. And what I had been doing is essentially when I update the value of a variable, I would remove the entire box and swap it out with a new box containing a new value. Whereas a more streamlined implementation would be to just replace the value inside the box with the new value, so that you number one hopefully aren't introducing a new box into the equation and having this unnecessary creation of extra boxes. And that will also potentially, and I think I've seen a bit of it so far, it should simplify a number of aspects of the binding functionality, whereas in the past I had a lot of implementation details relating to evaluating the left hand side, but up to a point where I found basically the environment that the value is to be updated in, and then updated the environment. Whereas now what I can potentially replace that with is just evaluate the left hand side as a regular value almost, and then once that gets to essentially a box, I can replace the item inside the box, rather than what I'd been doing before was evaluating up till the point that it was either a list or an object, and then replacing, like I said, the value referred to by a key or an index. So that's the idea here. And one other nice thing that I discovered, well, maybe nice or not depending on your personal preferences, but I thought it was nice that this limitation for essentially what I do with variables is they have to, in this language anyway, they have to be declared first. And with this change, because of the way it's implemented, it has in a way spilled over to how maps are updated as well, or objects. And essentially there's going to be a mechanism now whereby same way you have to declare variables before they're used. If you want to update a value in a map, you have to declare that before it's used, which is a bit novel. I would say there aren't, so it varies from language to language, but in general I would say the majority of languages would say that if you assign a value to an entry in a map, then you don't need to declare that first. So maybe that's a good sign that this isn't a good idea, but I actually kind of like the idea. So what I'm going to do is impose that as a limitation to start with, and it can always be relaxed later if it turns out to be a big pain to work with in practice. But the whole idea of this language anyway is to be kind of a playground of sorts, like I said. So yeah, we'll give it a go. So with that all said, that's a big load of talking and not a lot of coding. So where I was the last day was essentially these tests that are failing, I believe, are due to what I mentioned before, or what I mentioned just now in terms of values being, these are tests where the values were updated without the keys of those items being previously created. And the way that that's failing is, we can see it somewhere here. I believe it would be, where would it be? Oh yeah, down here, where I'm doing essentially a lookup for the item, and if the item doesn't exist here, it'll essentially panic. And the same thing's going to happen up here with indexing as well. So Now in this case, it should be all right because we have a check to see is the, first of all, it's a U size, so it's not going to be negative, so we don't have to check for less than or equal to, or we don't have to check for less than 0. And if it's greater than the number of items, greater than or equal to the number of items, then we get a failure. And that's a nice runtime error. Whereas for properties, and is this happening? Yeah, this is only happening with objects. So what I can do for the moment, what I'll do is, because this is going, I'm thinking the initial implementation, I'll do it as a patch. So I'll try and keep backwards compatibility. And then as a breaking change, now it's still on 0 point whatever. So in terms of semantic versioning, it doesn't really require a major update or a major version bump. But in terms of kind of thing, I guess, being a little bit logical with it, I think I'll do a patch level change first where I keep kind of backwards compatibility, and then I'll do a minor bump to signify, to account for the breaking change. So with that said, let's go ahead and see. So now this could be a source of issue because this could be a tau problem if I do a separate check here. So I'm thinking, you know, contains key, and then if it doesn't contain the key, it'll say, well, actually, what I would be doing is if the key doesn't exist, then put the value in there. So maybe we'll do it like this. Yeah, maybe it makes sense to create just insert the value if that key isn't populated already. And that would make the logic a little simpler down here. Otherwise, we'll need to create that value. Although, to a certain extent, a lot of this will be changing anyway. So let's take a look at the current implementation. Bind next performs a bind and returns an error if, yeah, in that circumstance. So what's currently happening with bind next is it's almost a mix of evaluation. Well, it's not really evaluating the value. I'm just thinking, we are walking through the values, and these are different kind of terminal situations, so we can't walk into those. And then if there's any kind of a situation of some kind of So I'm thinking in terms of the possible optimization or improvement that I can make for the left hand sides, where I kind of in the past I would have evaluated them up to the last point of the, shall we say, AST, and then taking a look at the names on the left hand side and tried to update those. Whereas what I can do now is, for example, if there's an indexing operation, I can actually evaluate the index and then take the returned item and assign to that instead. And that brings up an interesting point that I'd probably ignore. So if I do something like this, so x is equal to a1, and I do print x, and I do xa is equal to 2. I think I can probably use either type of assignment in that kind of case, which isn't such a big deal, but I prefer there to be one way of doing things. So here we have read and A2. Yeah, so that means that it doesn't matter what format you have for the assignment when you're assigning to indexes or keys, which is something that I might lock down as well. So maybe that'll be something I put into the scratch. Prevent assigning to keys indices with that for now, because that's going to change quite shortly as well. So I'm just looking at places where a bind occurs, and it happens in functions when we're binding parameters. It happens in assignments, operator assignments, and declarations, and that's basically it. So I'm kind of curious, can I replace that with an evaluation of the left hand side which is going to be to evaluate to a ValRef with source, which we can update. However, in the case of a declaration, we won't, like, the evaluation will fail because that item that we're looking up doesn't exist yet. So there are a couple of ways we can go about this. In that case, we can either add a new parameter to say that if we're in a var node or other area where the value can be declared, and it's kind of a declaration statement, then we can go ahead and create that item and then return the new item. It's kind of complicated either way, because either we have the bind and we kind of do it explicitly, or we piggyback on eval, which is already doing the kind of tree walking. It's somewhat much of a muchness. It probably will make a difference when I get to operator assignment though. So what I might do in that case is I'll more or less leave it as is to start with. Yeah, and then I can look at kind of optimizing it later, I guess. So let's see if that works, because at this point the right hand side is already going to be an arc mutex, I believe. So we should be able to just put it into the into the object, though we may need to do a clone. Depending on the ownership. And that's just a matter of getting a reference. Cool, and so we're still getting the error, no entry found for key, line 186. Okay, so we're also doing a similar kind of lookup at that point. Oops. Let's try that. That's just to do with a change that I think I made during testing. As this function's source change 1. That's this, that value. Object doesn't contain property value. It shouldn't matter what kind of Let's see, what did I change in there? Okay, nothing's changed now. But anyway, that difference of the colon shouldn't make a difference anyway, as I showed earlier. So this is occurring on line 9, so if we go 9 down, person.value doesn't exist. Let's see what happens if we just print the whole object. Okay, that's interesting. So if I give person a value and then I set it via this method, the value will update, but if the value didn't exist beforehand, then it doesn't get added. So what's going wrong there? I don't really like that that's happening because it's fairly subtle, the behavior. makes me feel like I haven't really figured out entirely what should be happening. And I also realize that there are other places. So I've updated the property accesses, the index accesses, but not the range indexing. And that could be a big pain to work through. Clone from slice. Yeah, it's replacing all the items, but in the old way. It shouldn't be too difficult to update that actually. But I better just remind myself. Bind objects, we don't seem to have the same issue right now because it's just delegating to bind next. Bind list is also delegating to bind next. So those ones are all right. So in this situation here of this value not being set properly, that is going to be a property access. So we're looking at this section. Realistically, I wouldn't need the clone. Yeah, and it doesn't make a difference anyway. I'll just run this on source change 1. How do I do debug formatting? Is it that? Yeah, seems to be. Okay. Yeah. Well, I want to check what the value of that is before and after the assignment. Yeah, so we can pretty plainly see that value does get set on it. So where is that going. Is it to do with this disappearing? So maybe this is introducing a new shall we say value into the scope. So one thing I would probably want to put in as a test in that case. So if I go, is there tests for objects, variable strings, stack trace, returns, print operations, loops? I guess variables, or maybe functions. Do I have function combinations? Function variables. So let's try this object, or we'll try object parameters. And in fact, I will just, oh, did that only fail on that one test? Okay, we'll leave it enabled like that. So, and what were the one, does it give it a list of successes? Yeah, all the rest were successful, that's fine. So in terms of output parameters, let's go function f takes what, just a v, or I would say p name is equal to Joe, and so we'll create person, and let's see, I will just go So I wonder, will this trigger the same issue as source change 1, because the object is being passed into the scope essentially the same way that this would be. Okay, so that's our issue with source change 1. Let's take a look at the other ones. So first we have object doesn't contain property age, and that's with mutation 1, which is interesting. So we're getting the error there, but not in the other test. And we had the workaround, or at least the, not necessarily workaround, but the logic to deal with that. And it still fails. But that's odd because, okay, that's the output before. Oh no, it's the same error because it's setting it all right, but then we get down to this part and it's raising an error saying it's not defined, or saying it doesn't exist. And then in this test on line 5, oh, that's just that. Interesting. What I don't get is why the output isn't getting messed up by, like, surely it's comparing standard output to the expected standard output. And in mutation 2, it should be doing the same, outputting the same debugging information as the one above it. So where is that going? That's very interesting. Well, it's not going to be indexing. It should be. Oh, it's because it's going into here now. Because the object does exist beforehand. So for some reason, when creating the new environment and adding an object to that environment with the new mechanism, the object is being created, but it's like a copy of the object that's coming in here. And I presume it's shallow, but let's just check to be sure. that should still trigger our output, or like it should fail because of the debugging output, but we should have the value that we expect. Yeah, exactly. So we get, oh no, that's mutation 2, mutation 3 is up here. Yeah, we get the debugging output. An object doesn't contain property first. Interesting. Okay, so it's kind of pervasive. I'm surprised that this isn't being caught by more tests. I would have thought that. Not like the tests are relatively comprehensive, but even just the coverage of them, I would have expected the tests that I would have just expected there to be more failures. Like, thank goodness there are at least these failures, but I mean, let's try this. Yeah, and that's giving the same error as well. And so I would suspect that and this is what surprises me, because surely I have a test for property assignment, but I must not, because this seems to not work. So prop assignment second last, and that does work. Interesting. So property assignment does work. But then, was it at the top, nested property assignment? Object doesn't contain property first. So this works, but this doesn't work. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so before the assignment, it's an empty array, or before the assignment, it's an empty object, and afterwards name is inside and it's populated, but then in this case, it's not. So there's something failing. And presumably it doesn't matter the way the access is being done. I mean, I presume so, but it's no harm to check. Yeah, so it's line 3 that's failing on. And the thing is, something is getting assigned to. It's just not the, well, it must be the object. But let's see, can we track this back, like track the object that is being assigned? So if we take a look at, let's see, nested prop assignment. So we can see that the object is being updated, but whatever is getting updated is disappearing. Yeah, so we have an empty array here. And like we saw before, yeah, so if we, yeah, so in number 1, if we have the value already, then it gets updated. But if it didn't have the value already, then it won't. Very interesting. So what's going on? So like I was saying, we might try and track the object through and see where, at what point it's disappearing. So let's see, we have it's bind next, and presumably that's happening in assign. Whoops. And bind next is being called from bind. Okay. And so it's going to be assign. And where was that? Was that function combinations, I guess? And let's see. Yeah, so we'll have two assignments here, but one's a declaration. So if we focus on the assignment, we should be kind of all right. But how to properly track this? I guess I could print out the context, because that's where it's going to be. Well, no, it's not going to be in the. Will it be in the context? No, the context is the evaluation context, and it's the scopes that's going to contain our value. This could be very big, but we'll give it a try. Okay, which one do we want to focus on? We want to focus on number 1. Okay, so we have person, they have name, and that's an empty object. We do the assignment, and afterwards it's still person with an empty object. So that's kind of what we were expecting in terms of the behavior that's been there so far. So where to go next? Where is props coming from? Props is coming from our expression, and that's our raw left hand side. So we've evaluated to this point. Where are we? We've evaluated this. So we're in bind at this point. We've gone, this is a raw expression property access, which has led us to this object. And then the same thing has happened for us to access this object, which is here. Yeah, let's try and track the evaluation through. So we have bind, we go into bind next, and then we'll go into a property access, and that'll presumably we'll encounter this line twice because we're accessing a nested property. But we've only got one exclamation mark here, so why is that? What used the code look like? Kind of confusing myself. Yeah, so it was just a plain insert before. So there wasn't any recursion happening before either. Did that even work before? Okay, let's try this. Let's just see, did these things actually work before? Actually, I'm not sure what the expected outputs would have been. So if we take a look at nested prop assignment 1, that didn't work before because it was giving the same error. Yeah, that wasn't working before. And nested prop assign 2 isn't working, but is that just because of the unexpected output? Yeah, that's just to do with this should say soap, but that's failing as well. So actually there are a lot of, I guess, just issues with the existing implementation. So this wasn't necessarily to do with the new changes. So then we have parameter mutation 1, 2, and 3. No, just 2 and 3. So this one worked. Oh, and those are just to do with and this is the same issue. So it's actually just to do with the nesting. Because what I really need to do is check if because at the moment what it's doing is only doing like one level of evaluation, so it's kind of saying you want to come back up? Okay. So what's happening here is we have one level of evaluation, and it's essentially saying let me see if I go up to nested prop assign 1. Yes, so in this case, what it's doing, let's go back to the bind. And we're in prop. In theory, what it's doing here is going one layer, and it should be assigning Joe to person name. So when person name gets output, that's still an empty object for some reason, even though I would kind of expect it to be outputting Joe for that. But regardless, on line 4 it's saying that that property doesn't exist. And I possibly should have been outputting this as well for debugging purposes, but howsever. Let's try that, and we'll do nested assign 1. Nested prop assign. Oh yeah, I was like, what am I looking at here? So we have the object, the name that we're looking up is first, and the value on the right hand side is Joe. And then afterwards, the object on the left hand side contains first, and it contains Joe, as we would have expected. So then name at this point presumably should contain Joe. But it's instead an empty object. So what's going on there? So first of all, one level of resolution for this is to add in the recursion, so that if the object on the left hand side, we do a bind next on the property on the left hand side, potentially. If it's not the leaf of this branch of the AST. But I'm still at a bit of a loose end as to why the output is just an object instead of where is this going? First is being assigned to be the value Joe, but that is just disappearing. Yeah, even straight away afterwards, person name is an empty object, which is what it was when person got declared. So what's happening to props? That's being evaluated as a new item. So yeah, expression on the left is being evaluated, and that's going to be a variable. Oh, hang on. Oh, I've been reading this backwards. This is the expression on the left hand side, and this is the name that's being looked up. And this is being evaluated So we've got person name is evaluating to that, which is what we expect. We're looking up first, or we're assigning to first, and person name is still empty afterwards though. Is it because when we evaluate person name, we're getting a different object? Like this is a value rather than a value reference. When we evaluate an expression, what do we get? We should get a ValRef with source. Yes. But then when we unlock it, we do what? Oops. We get a value with source, and we get the it should be the source, or it should be the original object from the scope. This is very confusing to me anyway. Oh dear. Let's take another look at this. So it's first. It's evaluating the left-hand side, which is the expression, or at least it's evaluating the expression part of this property access, which is giving back the empty object, which should be this. And yeah, what's the situation with prop assign to as well? So it's assigned to do, and it doesn't get updated. Even though it does get updated in the short term. Like props gets updated And in theory, props should be what is coming from scopes. How do I even debug this? Because that surely is the only object. Like up here, when it's an empty object, it could be kind of coming from anywhere. Whereas we can be fairly sure that this object containing dough is the same one in which we overwrite the value of last. And yet, when we go back to the scope stack, person name last is still set to dough. It's almost as if there's another object being brought in here. I'm hardly cloning the actual object that's being retrieved. So I've got the unlocked source. The namespace is what have you. That could be the issue there, where the item that's being retrieved from the namespace, whether that's an object or something else. Yeah, it could be an object, string. Oh no, it's basically saying based on whether it's a type property access or a regular property access. I get around that, because we've got a ValRef with source. We actually kind of want to be able to change the source independently of the object, or rather independently of the ValRef, which is actually what I had in the code base a long time ago, but I thought, oh no, the value needs to be paired with the source. But let me see. If I put up some note taking here. Oh no, that's not going to behave. Oh, maybe. Let's see. Screen share. Oh, I've never connected my device to this Wi-Fi. Okay, let's go check it. Check out the Wi-Fi password. I'll be back in 1 sec. And we're back. And I've just grabbed my tablet and let's take a look at what we have. So we're looking at val with source. So at the moment that's looking something like, if we were to say, you know, there's the static value here, there's the source here, which is a reference to another value, which is essentially the, oh, what's after happening there? Which is essentially a reference to the object that came from, and that can also have a source and so on. Now, what seems to be an issue here is that this is tucked behind an arc mutex, so I'll call it AM. And that's essentially what things, like, we can kind of consider that a pointer of sorts for the purposes of keeping track of things. Now, here in the code, where have we? When we're accessing an object, it's got all its items there. And when we're doing a property lookup, it's returning mostly because the source is getting cloned. We are returning a source pointer which works out well for us, but then the value itself is a clone. So if we, I don't know how I'm going to, yeah, I guess I'll give it an apostrophe just to mark it as new. Now, that is a problem I think, because this is getting the inner value from the object. So if I go last object here, it's reaching in and copying that value, whereas realistically we want a reference to that value. But because of the way value at source is declared, we can only pair a raw value with the source. Whereas what we possibly need to be able to do, so if we say that source is, we'll use that to denote a pointer or an arc mutex. Value, I believe, needs to be a pointer as well, so that it's not a copy of the item it's coming from, but it's actually a reference to the item itself, so that we wouldn't have a lock here, we would actually have a clone of the lock. And by doing that, we would need to allow the value and source to be essentially set independently. Yeah, how was I doing it before? So I'd essentially have a value and a source, and then if I was visiting a child, like an indexed item or a property of that value, then we would get to something like this, but then that's a copy of the child and not the child itself. The source will be fine. It would be pointing back to that. This looks like a big issue. This looks like an impediment for dealing with nested objects in general, and I'm very surprised that this didn't get caught in tests so far. So where to go from here? It looks like I'll need to update ValRef with source to be this kind of a structure. So it would have to be arc mutex value and let's see. So most importantly, in our pairing would be essentially a pointer to a value instead of the value itself. And then I guess yeah, we'd probably make that a value reference would probably be an arc mutex value, and then here we would essentially have a ValRef and an optional ValRef for the source. And that would essentially be it. Now I think that will probably cause a lot of havoc in the code base. I will need a lot of refactoring. Oh, hi Flappy. I've been on a little bit of a diatribe there, lost in my own thoughts, so thanks for messaging in. So if this is the approach that we're going to go with, I'm just a little surprised, or I'm just a little apprehensive that it's going to be a ValRef here instead of a value, but I think that should be fine, and it possibly even makes more sense because, again, this structure where it's a value without an arc mutex around it means that anytime there is a value with a source, it's the original value. Could that be all right? No, because the original value then is always only paired. Yeah, that's the problem. And that's, I guess it took me a while to reason through it, but essentially, maybe I will throw the tablet back on again and also throw in the charger. But where's the tablet here? And let's go back to screen sharing. Oh, that doesn't seem to want to screen share anymore. Saying accept the connection. I don't see where that is. Might give it one more go. Right, there we go. Okay, so basically the not really helping their kit at this point. Where were we? So the problem, yeah, if I were to put it in a nutshell at this point, when we have a value such as, you know, we could have, let's see, person name pointing to this object, and then this object could have last name Doe, and its source is pointing to this object. But then if we access that same object, if we access, sorry, if we access this object from somewhere else, so for example, we could do something like, so if we have our code on the right hand side, we have person is equal to name. I'm going to leave out the quotes for keys for the moment. And we have last is do. So if we have that kind of a setup, and then we say x is equal to person dot name, and then we try to do something like x dot last whatever, even though there's already a reference to this object via person name, when we access it in this way, the source of the object, of the value in that case, is going to be this location. But then here we've introduced a new place that we can access the same object from. And in that scenario, we want this to call the source X, which is problematic because we've two sources for the same value. And this is the literal value almost, but the source is changeable depending on what is accessing it, and therein lies the problem. So we actually need to be able to just change the source and value fairly flexibly. So with that all said, let's see, ValRef with source in this case. So we're going to introduce a new pub struct. I wonder if it needs to be public for the moment. ValRef. It's just going to be that. And to be honest, this will probably make things a good bit easier in terms of just understandability. I mean, instead of having this kind of shared structure where you have a value and then this kind of recursive nature, it's really just, you just have 2 pointers to 2 objects, or 2 values rather, and they can kind of be pointing wherever. But anyway, this is possibly I'm dreading clicking compile here. So struct, that should be type instead. Okay, how many errors was that? 46. I mean, if that was the extent of it, that wouldn't be too bad. But let's see. I just hope that I'm not being very short-sighted here and thinking I'm fixing it when really I'm making it worse. But this is making more sense the more I think about it. So val with source, first of all, doesn't exist anymore. So it'll instead need to be ValRef with source, and that'll be v, and source will be none. That's nice and easy. And then for this, source will need to be a ValRef. Okay, that's going to cause more mayhem, I think. And mod, where is val with source being used? Just one place. Okay, I actually cannot see the screen right now. Okay, that's that's helped a little. So where was I? No, you don't need to knock that over. No, that's okay. There we go. So let's see. Oh, what am I looking at here? You want to go down? Okay. Want some food? Okay, maybe we'll have some snacks first. Cool. I don't intend to be at this for too much longer. I mean, this is potentially going to be a lot of work, but I would like to just get a sense of what I'm working with now. So funcval in this case, so it's a ValRef with source, so that's now going to be ValRef with source. Yeah, so one of the big things is going to be these unlocked values. So that's going to generally be like that, I think. but maybe I'll do it somewhere else first. There might be another. No, that's. Yeah, okay, let's start with that, and that might help us out a bit. And I'll also need to remember to bump the year on that one. Okay, so how do we get our value out of the mutex guard? Do I just do that? So before it was like that. And we had ValRef with source was an arc. Oops. Mutex. And it looked like so it looked like that before. So in that kind of a scenario, if I had a ValRef with source and then I did a lock unwrap, that would in theory be of type mutex guard value. No, mutex guard val with source. And then if I did v dot v, that would give me my value. In this case, so do I need to do an ampersand or an asterisk. Oh, I'll need to comment those out. Let's give this a go. So well, we've 38 errors. Let's see if that actually helped. Yeah, that seemed to resolve it. Yeah. And maybe if I go into mod, and yeah, that's doing the same thing there, is the dereference. I'm just wondering why that item didn't need the reference before. I'm not sure. Let's see, 139, same situation, I would say. That's 35 errors. This is kind of... I have a feeling I could be at this all night, but it's a bit addictive. I really need to run entr with... Oh, it is running with -c, so... Just gonna do that. Still 35. That didn't seem to... And I guess I can't just do that because then I would get the guard rather than the value reference. Okay, but maybe I can forego the guard like that. 34, yeah, that seemed to do it. Okay. I mean, the bones of 30 errors is fairly surmountable. And that knocked out a chunk of errors. Oops. And lots of them do seem to be boiling down to getting locks. I wonder, can those even be simplified now with this new structure? Okay, getting through the errors fairly handy as well. I guess there's a good level of abstraction so far in the project that being able to modify the constructor for ValRef with source does a lot of the heavy lifting. In terms of what I'm wanting to accomplish here. And here's the thing that sparked it all. and this is going to be the value itself. A new reference to it. I presume I'll need to clone it though, but we'll see. Okay, for the moment, I'll just do it like this. Yeah, so in this case we're basically cloning the reference, but with a new source. Going to want to do the same thing there. And for the moment, yeah, I guess I'll do the same thing here. That's interesting. I need to put more thought into how to resolve that one. I wonder, do I have tests for recursion? I don't seem to actually. That will be an important one to test. Oh yeah, functions. Okay, yeah, I do have tests for that. I would have thought so. Fairly essential thing, I think, in general these days. Oh, we're almost at the end of these. Can I call that function? So this is a variable and I want a ValRef with source. Where is this defined? This is the source. But is it a different kind of source? No, it's the source of the function value. Oh yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that's the whole point of it. So what we can do in that case is, if I go to value, and it would be a new ValRef. Okay, we'll do the Same kind of hacky thing as before for the moment. Let's try that. Yeah, what does happen if... Okay, for the moment, I'll just do unwrap because in theory... Is this a method call? No, it's a regular call, so it may or may not have a value. Oh, where did I go there? So let's see. Yeah, a lot of this is gonna have to change. This is really just to get the compiler happy, and then I shall start cleaning up after. I seem to have some unbalanced braces. Okay, where are we going here? So value needs to be... So what was the problem with this again? I need to look back at it. So it is an option and I need it to not be an option. Let's just be very plain with it. So found an option, so it needs to be like that. So if it does exist, then it's that. Otherwise, let's try that. And of course I need to actually change that as well. Oh, that should probably be like that, right? And same issue here, I think. So if this exists, oh no, this probably is a slightly simpler situation. Uh-oh. 17 life cycle errors. I mean, that's not too many. Let's see. Let's see what we're working with at least. I don't think I will delve into these, but cannot move out of dereference. Okay, yeah, so that's why that was needed. But is that going to give an issue then in terms of the matches? No? Okay. And I can do the same here. I said I wasn't going to get into these, but if these are fairly straightforward to resolve, then maybe I really should stop, but I'm just very curious as to how this turns out. those changes, which were needed in the end. Okay, 7 errors. Let's see. Yeah, I think that's the one that I can clone. Let's try that. 536, what did I do there? Put that there because you said so. But that's my own failing to comprehend exactly what the error is at this point. Oh, I guess what I probably should done is and then make x be the expression at the end of the block. So I'll let that part out. 1406, what's the issue here? Just another one of those. Okay, 4 errors. Do I have it in me? Do I have the brain capacity at this point to actually keep figuring out what's going wrong at these points? So there's a move there. Because I probably need to do a clone. I think I was kind of expecting that, and probably similar here. 710. Let's try that, see where it gets us. And same issue here about the lifetime. We should be down to our last error then, and I want to get rid of those because they keep coming up as a warning. 755, no, 710, 1225. Oh, that's interesting. And realize that because it'll always be set, it doesn't need to be mutable. That's cool. I said I'd see would it work with that. Now the real test. Okay, well, it was only running 2 tests there. Let's see, And actually that's mostly due to my error output, isn't it? So if I disable those print lines, what happens? Oh dear. I'm not sure, is my heart ready for this? Coming up to 3 hours of coding. Wow. Okay, so there's a deadlock somewhere. Not looking forward to figuring out where that is, but lots of the tests are passing, which is great. So let's see which test. Like, this is kind of nice because it should actually tell which tests are failing. So it looks like cannot call non-function is failing and no stack trace is failing, or at least they seem to be hanging, presumably for deadlock. How do I disable tests? I can't really disable them. I guess my best bet is to just put them in another test and comment them out. So, and then we have runtime errors. That's somewhat worrying. So it looks like the first error test in both of the files that deal with errors are failures. So maybe I will disable those for the moment. Kinda looks like, yeah, I'm not sure what it looks like. Cool, let's try that. Okay, still some deadlock, which kind of makes sense, except for the fact that I commented those out. Do I have to? Okay, let's try that. And still it's picking them up. Not really sure why those keep getting picked up. I think I'll just delete the files at this point. going on? Why are they still being picked up? I think just rebuild the project from scratch, which will take probably a long time. But it looks like the no, that's going to be way too long. I want answers now. Let's see. How can I make sure that the build files get rerun? Maybe if I change build.rs, and it could force them to get remade. Let's try that. How is this? Where are... This is not... Oh, runtime errors and stack trace. Are those... Yeah, those are the files I deleted. Oh, did those finish? What? I'm confused now. So how are those? I don't know how those are passing. I like those files don't even exist anymore. But anyway, that is really good that basically all the tests pass, and it looks like the ones that didn't pass, it's more to do with the output. There doesn't, so there's some panics on the files that I deleted on the tests that were hanging, but most of the test failures seem to just be from ones which, my brain at this point, but it seems to be from tests where I just, like, they're new tests and there's some debugging information in there, not the print lines that I added to the, I think it was bind.rs module, but rather these were issues with just the debugging prints that I had in the test files themselves. I really need to leave this go, but I'm very curious. It's just so close. But no, I think that's it for today. I am at risk of, I don't know, doing something silly and potentially deleting work. So, like, realistically, it was a foundational change to the code base, like changing how values are represented for the most part, but actually it wasn't a huge amount of changing required in the code base itself, which is kind of crazy to think. But yeah, if the tests are still passing, I'll take it. Now, the deadlocks that are occurring in the no stack trace, okay, so there seems to be 3 methods at the moment, or 3 tests at the moment, that seem to be giving issue. So there's the no stack trace, cannot call non-function, and was there another stack trace test that was failing? Yeah, just stack trace. So those will be worth investigating. Oh, will I just... No, I really need to stop, but... Almost did something silly there. In fact, very nearly did something silly there. So let's pop these back into existence and see. So it's cannot call non-function. And then it was stack trace and no stack trace. It's very strange that these are the first tests in each of those files. That to me is very sus. And if it weren't for the fact that so many of the other tests are actually passing, I wouldn't be trying this again. At least not right now. But I want to see, does that happen with, like, if I remove those tests? So it does. So those were causing a deadlock for whatever reason. And I've made some kind of an error here. Oh, just in the position of file numbers and things, I'd say. I mean, they're very strange tests to have failed, I think. But it's nice that even just as a consequence of changing, I mean, I updated the exact parts of the code that I thought could be causing the issue. So in a way, it shouldn't be a surprise that it works. But yeah, I don't know. it always is cause for a double take for me. But runtime errors undefined. Oh, that's just the line number as well. And this functions, and that's just to do with the fact that I added print person instead of print person value. Great. Awesome. That is back to square one in a way. But no, it's an improvement because now the language actually works in more scenarios that it should work in. And that was a pretty glaring issue, the fact that nested objects couldn't be set, because whenever you did an object retrieval either via a property access or an index access, then you are getting a copy of that object rather than like a reference to the object. And realistically, I possibly should have flagged that for myself in that section of code where I was doing the clone. But yeah, I think it was the way that I was thinking, okay, well, if the tests say it's fine, but clearly the tests weren't comprehensive enough. So at least when I was adding in this new feature, or not even a new feature as well, it was just another refactoring. But at least when I was introducing that, then there was also a need to add in new tests that finally flagged the issue. I thought it was an issue with the new refactoring, which I'll need to get back to next time as well. But that's all part of it. Maybe I'll do a bit of that tomorrow. But yeah, thanks to anyone who is checking this out. And thanks for the comments in the stream, as always. And yeah, I think there were a lot of pauses and just blank staring at the screen for a lot of today's stream. But I'm pleased that the back got broken on it in the end. It's in a good spot. I'm not looking forward to debugging the deadlock issues. There are a lot of parts of the code that now I think that I'm doing. There are lots of areas that I'm performing kind of unlocks on mutexes that I think could be causing these issues, but we'll see how it goes. And like I say, thanks for checking out the stream, and see you next time.